Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Note that all attendee lines are muted at this time, but you may send a question to all panelists through the chat box. And if you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Heidi Frechette, Deputy Assistant Secretary for HUD's Office of Native American Programs.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third day of ICDBG-CARES Implementation Training. I hope some of you have been able to join us for the other two trainings. We will go over the material again today and take your questions. I also want to say I hope you all are keeping safe, staying safe, healthy, and as we get through this pandemic together. Please note that the ICDBG-CARES applications, we will begin to accept them on June 1st at 3 p.m. So I want all folks to know that, and we're getting this training in before that to answer your questions. But if we can't answer them today, or if you have additional questions after reading this material, please reach out to your area offices to assist you, or Hillary Atkins, who's going to be presenting today. So with that, don't want to take up too much time. I know we have a lot of material to cover. I want to turn it over to Hillary Atkins, who's the Director of Grants Management. Hillary?
Thank you, Heidi. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this training on the ICDBG-CARES Notice. As Heidi mentioned, this is the third round of this training. We held a training last week on Friday on the same material, and just yesterday. Friday's training was recorded and is actually available on Code Talk. Just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And the same thing will happen with these trainings. These trainings will be recorded, the ones from yesterday and today's training, and posted on the Code Talk website. Please also note that the slides from this training are posted on the Code Talk website. I believe that we either already did or will be sending a message to you all with the link to those slides. Just know if that's not working for you or if you didn't get them, they are also posted on Code Talk. So today we're going to go through material to make sure that you're familiar with the ICDBG-CARES Notice. Please make sure as you're thinking about applying and putting your application together that you thoroughly review that notice and also review the waiver notice that was published previously, which has waivers that apply to the ICDBG-CARES program. Please also make sure that you're able to get the forms that are linked in the notice. We did find out yesterday that some of those links were not working. They should be working now, and it will be important for you to make sure that you can get those forms open so that you can use them to apply for the program. Okay, so today we're going to just dive right into the slides. We'll be saving questions until the end. There's already questions coming in the chat box. Please feel free to use that. We'll also take questions over the phone, and when we get to that point, we'll give you all instructions on how to do that. Okay, so this is just a bit of an overview of what we'll be going through today. And here's some background on the CARES Act. The CARES Act for the ICDBG CARES grants gave an additional $100 million in funding. So that's $100 million in ICDBG imminent threat funding for qualified applicants for emergencies that constitute imminent threats to health and safety and must be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. The Act also gave authority to waive or provide alternative requirements to facilitate or expedite the use of ICDBG CARES grant funds. The waivers also apply to the FY 2019 and FY 20 funding that is provided under their ICDBG NOFA. We just published today an allocation notice that talks a bit about that and also gives the allocation for that funding opportunity. And we should be announcing the ICDBG award soon. Additional waivers and alternative requirements are described a bit in the next slide. And you'll also notice as we go through these slides, we'll be discussing some of them as they affect the notice requirements. Just keep in mind that regular ICDBG imminent threat grants are still available and can be applied for. You submit those applications to the area Office of Native American Program as specified in that NOFA and in the program guidance on that program. That's Program Guidance 2018-04. Okay, so waivers applicable to ICDBG-CARES. HUD issued a notice, CIH Notice 2020-05, on April 10th that outlines various waivers and alternative requirements that apply to the program. So here on the slide, we've got a list of some of those. If you're interested in learning more about them and getting in more in depth into them, we did do a training that you hopefully were able to attend, a series of trainings on those waivers, and those are posted on the ONEP COTAP website. You should also make sure to review that notice. They cover things such as removal of the public services 15% cap, rental assistance, utility assistance, food, clothing, and other emergency assistance, purchase of equipment, operating expenses for public facilities, and new housing construction. Please keep in mind, ICDBG grantees must ensure that ICDBG funds are used to supplement other federal sources of funding for this purpose, including funding provided by the Indian Health Service, and should not be used to supplant such funding. So this is a duplication of benefits concern. We'll touch on this a bit later, but want to keep that in mind as you're preparing your application. All right. Eligible applicants for this funding opportunity are the same as for regular ICDBG. It's put forth at 24 CFR 1003.5. If you have any questions about your eligibility, please feel free to reach out to your area office. Some tribal organizations may not be able to secure an appropriate tribal resolution authorizing it to apply for ICDBG-CARES grants on behalf of an Indian tribe. So under the notice, any tribal organization that intends to submit an ICDBG-CARES application may request a waiver of this requirement in the application. So this is one of those waivers that's articulated in the waiver notice. Please keep in mind, HUD will consider the application incomplete if it does not include the waiver request with an accompanying justification for why there is good cause for HUD to grant the waiver request. So a few slides here down the road, we'll get into the different submissions that are required for this application. And we'll talk about how we'll be reviewing the application when it first comes in to make sure that it's complete. And what we mean by complete is that it has all of those submissions. This waiver request, if needed, if you're a tribal organization applying on behalf of the tribe and you're unable to secure a resolution, this waiver request will be one of those required submissions. So to reiterate, the waiver must demonstrate good cause and must provide HUD with information on any other steps that is taken to consult with the beneficiary Indian tribe on the contents of the application. Must provide any other relevant information demonstrating why it is not practical or safe to secure a tribal resolution. So if we ultimately fund this application, we will concurrently grant the waiver of 24 CFR 1003.5B and make the award to the tribal organization. Any tribal organization that receives an award must consult with the beneficiary Indian tribe that they serve in a manner that is feasible and where it is safe and practical to do so, and submit the tribal resolution authorizing the application at a later date. Okay, the content of application. Well, this is that list of submissions that I alluded to just a bit ago. The application must include the following to be considered complete and to maintain its place in the application submission queue. So what we're going to do when applications come in, we're going to take that time that they're submitted to determine first come, first served funding, and we're going to do an initial check to make sure that the application is complete. If the application does not include all of these submissions and their sub-items, that place in line, that date stamp, will go away, and the applicant will need to resubmit the application once it is complete. Okay, so here are the submissions. The first is Standard Form 424. Here we have the link here on the slide, but as I noted earlier, the links to these forms are also in the notice. The second is HUD 2880. Third submission is the HUD 4123, the cost summary. Okay, the next submission is the project description summary. So this one gets a bit more involved. There's a bunch of sub-items that we're going to talk through. So as part of the project description summary, we must include, first, a written description of the activities, projects, or programs that the applicant plans to undertake and how the activities, projects, or programs are tied to preventing, preparing for, and or responding to COVID-19. Also under that item, a written statement must be submitted describing how the funded activities will be carried out successfully, timely, and within the proposed timeline, and in compliance with program requirements. Also within that item, a narrative description must be submitted of the implementation schedule. So of note here, applicants should be mindful to propose appropriate implementation timelines. HUD reserves the right to reject activities, projects, or programs with implementation timelines that are so lengthy that HUD determines, based on its best judgment and discretion, that the activities, projects, or programs proposed cannot reasonably prevent, prepare for, or respond to COVID-19. Now, I know we're getting into some detail here with these submission items. This information is also in the notice. And once again, these slides will be posted. Okay, continuing with the narrative description. If HUD questions the proposed timeline, HUD will notify the applicant of this deficiency and work with the applicant to ensure that the revised implementation schedule is reasonably set to allow the applicant to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. If the applicant fails to revise the implementation schedule to HUD satisfaction, HUD reserves the right to only fund a portion of the application or reject the entire application and award a grant to the next fundable applicant. If an otherwise complete application includes a questioned implementation plan, they will retain their original date stamp while HUD works with the applicant to revise the proposed implementation schedule. Let me back up just a second. I forgot to note, for the standard form 424, we have gotten a couple questions about a few of the items that need to be filled out there. Please use the PIH notice number as the FOA, and please use the regular ICDBG CFDA for that item. Just wanted to mention that. Come up a few times. Okay, sorry about that. Let's move forward. Okay, so back to the narrative description. Applications with implementation schedules longer than 12 months will be accepted provided that the applicant provides HUD with justification, including supporting documentation demonstrating why the proposed timeline is reasonably set to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. HUD will consider all relevant factors, including but not limited to the nature of the activities being proposed, the size of the grant requested, any disruption in supply chain, barriers caused by a short or disrupted construction season, infrastructure challenges, impact of COVID-19 on the applicant's operations, and its ability to carry out activities, projects, or programs more expeditiously. Okay, continuing with the narrative description. For new housing construction projects, we will only fund applications that propose to carry out new housing construction that is clearly designed to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19, for example, to reduce overcrowding, and that the applicant plans to carry out expeditiously. On economic development projects, due to other available CARES Act resources, are encouraging non-economic development projects. HUD will consider funding economic development projects only after ICDBG CARES activities are fully funded first and if funding remains available. Okay, moving on the submissions list. The next is the HUD 4125, which is the implementation schedule. We're also requiring a detailed budget submission. And as we discussed earlier, if you're a tribal organization looking to apply on behalf of a tribe, the waiver request, if you're unable to get that tribal resolution. All right. One other thing to note in the submission list, we have these various forms that we just listed off. If you're proposing an application that involves multiple activities or projects, it might make sense to include separate submissions for them. You should feel free to do so. So it would be all part of one application, but depending on the kinds of projects and activities you're submitting, it may make sense to make some of these submissions, some of these form submissions separately. Okay, funding criteria and requirements. Through the waiver notice that we published earlier in the year in April, HUD streamlined the application process while also ensuring that the ICDBG CARES grant funds will be used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. Those waivers were reflected a bit in the submission requirements, but also here in the funding criteria. For citizen participation, public meetings are not required before applying for ICDBG CARES grant funding. However, applicants will be required to publish or post information on applicant plans for ICDBG CARES funds and accept and consider comments received. One thing, so at this point, please post information for the citizen participation process. Please make sure that you are doing that. Please also keep in mind that we will need to see a resolution on citizen participation at some point. If that's not submitted with the application, then we would follow up with you during the application review process to get that from you. It could either be prior to receiving the funding, or we could work with you to, depending on the circumstances, issue some sort of waiver later on that requirement. When we met yesterday, held the training yesterday, there were some questions about what should be included in the posting. There is a regulation on this in ICDBG that's pretty general information about the projects and plans that you would need to post. But if anybody has questions about that, we're happy to take those and explain further. Okay. Next funding criteria, eligible purposes. So the application must prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus for emergencies that constitute imminent threats to health and safety. We will only fund applications that propose to carry out projects and activities that meet those eligible purposes. Urgency and immediacy of threats. The urgency and immediacy of the threat does not have to be independently verified before approval of the application. So that's a bit different from the regular ICDBG IT program. The urgency and immediacy of the threat will be presumed by HUD unless HUD has evidence to the contrary. On non-reoccurring threats and impact on service area, applicants do not need to demonstrate that COVID-19 is a non-reoccurring imminent threat and that it has an impact on an entire service area. HUD will presume that this is the case unless you have evidence to the contrary. Available resources. Applicants do not have to demonstrate that other tribal funding sources cannot be made available to alleviate the threat. Coordination and duplication of benefits. Please make sure to coordinate locally and with other federal agencies to ensure that funds are used to address gaps in funding, avoid unnecessary overlap in effort, and to avoid any duplication of benefits. Eliminate duplication of benefits by ensuring federal financial assistance is not provided for the same cost paid by any other source or private insurance. So we'll have some further guidance on duplication of benefits in the near future, including some tools to help with that analysis. Okay, on administration and planning. ICDBG-CARES grantees may not expend more than 20% of their grant amount, plus program income towards administration and planning costs. And on program income, any program income derived from the use of ICDBG-CARES grant funds will be considered program income and must be spent on eligible ICDBG-CARES program activities. I will provide instructions to ICDBG-CARES grantees on the disposition of such program income at the time of closeout. Okay. All right, so the grant ceilings for this program. The ICDBG-CARES grant ceilings are based on the IHBG-CARES funding formula. So what we mean by that is here on the slide in the table. If the applicant was allocated more than $2 million of IHBG-CARES funding formula, the grant ceiling for this opportunity is $3 million. If the applicant was allocated more than $750,000 but less than $2 million in IHBG-CARES funding formula, the grant ceiling is $1.5 million. If the applicant was allocated less than $750,000 in IHBG-CARES formula funding, the grant ceiling for this opportunity is $900,000. So how did we get to that? The grant ceilings are based on feedback from tribes and PDHEs. We did a bit of a consultation process on this and got a lot of feedback on grant ceilings specifically. So we took that feedback very seriously, and it heavily informed the approach. As I indicated, the grant ceiling amounts are based on the amount of funds that were allocated under the IHBG-CARES program. You can find those allocations at this link here that's on this slide, which is on the ONAP-COTOC website. So through these grant ceilings, we're accomplishing the following goals: setting maximum grant amounts that are sensitive to the fact that some Indian tribes have larger populations with higher needs, recognizing that IHBG-CARES funds may not be enough funding for the smallest Indian tribes to address serious COVID-19 related needs, and that this opportunity can help fill that funding gap, and maintaining parity with the standard imminent threat grant. As you may have noticed that lowest ceiling is the same amount as the highest ceiling under the regular imminent threat grant program. Okay, continuing on with the funding criteria. Lead-based paint requirements are required and are not waived. And same with environmental requirements. The environmental requirements are still required and not waived under this notice. Okay, eligible purposes. We've touched on this several times, but we need to ensure that the proposed activities can be tied to one of the following three eligible purposes: prevent, prepare, or respond to COVID-19. So we'll be looking at each application to ensure that that is the case. These applications can propose short to long-term activities that meet the purposes of the CARES Act. We're encouraging grantees to prioritize expending these funds as soon as possible, given the ongoing COVID-19 national emergency. We reserve the right to reject activities, projects, or programs with implementation timelines that are so lengthy that we determine that the project or activity cannot be justified as reasonably preventing, preparing, or responding to COVID-19. Okay, continuing with eligible purposes. We understand that some activities don't obviously fit under one or more of the categories. Just use your best judgment and tie them to an activity, or tie the activity to one of these categories. These grants do not have to comply with the primary objective of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, that no less than 70% of expenditures of the grant must be for activities that meet the criteria in 24 CFR 1003.208A through D. Essentially what that means is these grants can serve over income. However, there are a couple of parameters that are articulated in the waiver notice to keep in mind. On emergency payments, over income can only receive those emergency payments for up to 3 months. There is a waiver in Section 14D of the waiver notice that allows low and moderate income to receive emergency payments for up to 6 months. Also keep in mind that emergency mortgage assistance remains limited to 3 months for everyone. Okay, eligible activities. So we've got kind of a handful of slides here that go through examples of activities, projects, or programs that could be funded, provided they meet one of the eligible purposes under the CARES Act. So I'm going to walk us through those slides. It's going to be a lot of me just reading through example activities, but want to do that so you can, as you're listening, consider what you're thinking of putting together for your application. So bear with me. Please also keep in mind that these are just examples. This isn't an all-inclusive list. Okay, so under the category of housing activities, rehabilitation of and other improvements to housing to prepare units to be used to temporarily house persons that need to quarantine or shelter in place. Rehabilitation of housing to improve ventilation to reduce the risk of COVID-19. New construction of housing, including tiny homes, when such construction is done expeditiously and carried out to reduce overcrowding or to otherwise prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. Acquisition of modular homes or RVs to meet an immediate need to provide housing for medical workers and other essential service providers and frontline staff. Under the category of public facilities and infrastructure, construction of permanent or temporary facilities for testing, diagnosis, or treatment of COVID-19, rehabilitation of facilities to establish an infectious disease treatment clinic, acquisition, rehabilitation, or construction of a group living facility that may be used to centralize patients undergoing treatment, retrofitting of a food bank to ensure that employees and volunteers can safely work in the facility and distribute food. Construction or conversion of structures that can serve as temporary emergency shelters, shelter homeless persons, and minimize risk of community spread. Paying for the operation and maintenance expenses of existing shelters and other public facilities, not including staffing costs, designed to ensure homeless persons are provided safe shelter and to minimize the risk of community spread. Okay, continuing with public facilities and infrastructure examples, acquisition or conversion of a motel or hotel building or similar facility to expand capacity of hospitals to accommodate isolation of patients during recovery, expanding or preparing water lines to ensure families have access to water to adhere to CDC guidelines and prevent the spread of COVID-19, purchase of water tank trucks and other water distribution equipment, supplies, and facilities to support families without access to water, purchase of emergency ambulances and related specialized equipment and tools to expand medical and other emergency services, expanding cell towers and broadband infrastructure capacity needed to assist communities lacking internet and phone service to conduct business, allow students to participate in distance learning, support telehealth strategies, and provide other community services, provided such activities can be carried out expeditiously. Okay, under public services. Applicants may provide new or quantifiably increased public services. ICDBG-CARES funds are not subject to a 15% cap on public services that normally apply to ICDBG grant funds. Okay, so some examples: up to 6 months of emergency payments in the form of rental assistance, utility assistance, including internet access to allow children to engage in distance learning, food assistance, clothing, medical, and other emergency assistance. Placement of homeless persons in hotel motels and other non-congregate sheltering to minimize infection. Job training to expand the pool of healthcare workers and technicians that are available to treat disease within a community. Continue with public services. Providing security to ensure the health and safety of community members and to secure construction sites and community facilities from theft or vandalism. Testing, diagnosis, or other services at a fixed or mobile location. Increasing the capacity and availability of targeted health services for infectious disease response within existing health facilities. Equipment, supplies, and materials necessary to carry out a public service. Purchasing groceries for a food bank for distribution to vulnerable. Delivering meals to quarantine individuals or individuals that need to maintain social distancing due to medical vulnerabilities. Acquisition or leasing of telehealth equipment or services to allow assisted residents access to healthcare providers from home. Okay, we got through that. Here we've got a list of ineligible activities. So, first and foremost, activities, projects, or programs that are not reasonably tied to preparing for, preventing, and responding to COVID-19 are ineligible under the CARES program, ICDBG CARES program. Unless waived or modified by HUD, ineligible activities described currently in the regulation, 24 CFR 1003.207, continue to be ineligible, such as buildings or portions thereof used for the general conduct of government, political activities, and general government expenses. ICDBG CARES grant funds cannot be used to replace or reimburse ICDBG grant funds that were reprogrammed and used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19, and then used for other activities. Okay, as Heidi made sure to point out when she was giving the introduction, we will begin accepting applications on June 1st. at 3 p.m. Eastern. Any applications submitted before this time will not be considered. Applicants will be reminded to submit on or after the time and date we just noted. So essentially at this point we have a bounce back message if you submit anything to the inbox letting you know that you need to resubmit any submitted applications on June 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern. Applications must be submitted to ICDBG-CARES@HUD.gov. We have a dedicated email inbox to take those submissions. Do not submit ICDBG CARES applications to the area ONAP through grants.gov or via regular mail. If you send an application to the area ONAP, it will not be date stamped and you'll be redirected to submit the application to ICDBG-CARES@HUD.gov. So save that email address now, and please note that date, June 1st, 2020, and time, 3 p.m. Eastern. Applications will be considered and awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. Applications will be date stamped based on the time they received in the inbox in the ICDBG-CARES@HUD.gov inbox. If an application does not include all the required submissions, it will be considered incomplete and lose its position with respect to any other submitted complete applications, which we touched on when we went through the submissions. Please also note, if a required submission is included but is materially deficient, the application will be considered incomplete and lose its position with respect to other submitted applications. A required submission will be considered materially deficient if the information included in the submission is so deficient that HUD determines at its own discretion that the submission is effectively incomplete. So it's basically what we're getting at here is if you submit something, if you don't submit something initially, that will be considered incomplete. If you submit something but the information is not addressing what the submission requires or something like that, it will be considered to be materially deficient. If an application is considered incomplete, ONAP will notify the applicant as soon as possible and advise the applicant on how to cure any deficiency. Then the applicant can resubmit a complete application to that email address, ICDBG-CARES@HUD.gov, and it will be date stamped based on that time of receipt. ONAP will then review complete applications and determine those to fund. We may require additional information before funding the application. If we do, we will let you know, and you must respond to ONAP with this additional information within the time frame that ONAP identifies. If the applicant does not respond within that time frame, the application will be considered incomplete and lose its position with respect to any other submitted applications. ONAP may provide less funding to an applicant than the full amount requested in the application, and we may fund only certain activities, projects, or programs proposed in an application. And just again want to reiterate, all of this information is in the notice. Okay, some information on additional funding options. If within the first month of accepting applications, HUD finds that demand will likely far exceed the total available funding, we reserve the right to set aside the final $20 million or a lesser amount to award to tribes with the greatest need or urgency rather than on a first-come, first-served basis. If HUD exercises this option and sets aside an amount to be awarded later, HUD is not obligated to award or any otherwise fundable applications that were previously received but were not funded because funding under that first round was depleted. However, HUD reserves the right to review such applications and determine whether they should be funded based on any new award criteria that HUD may set for the second round of awards. We may also award additional funding through the ICDBG-CARES program if a sufficient amount of ICDBG-CARES funding remains unobligated after a period of time and projected program demand is low. A couple of helpful reminders here on this slide. These are things we touched on, but we'll go through them one more time. Make sure you can open all required forms sooner than later. Post your citizen participation information now. Tribal organizations submitting on behalf of a tribe who are unable to get a tribal resolution, as it may not be safe or practicable to do so, must include a waiver request and justification in their application. Incomplete applications will not be reviewed and will lose their place in line until a complete application is submitted. And a definition of an incomplete application, either missing an item listed in Section 5 of the notice, all those submissions we went through, or the submission has no information. So please make sure you test your forms in advance to make sure the information you put in has saved. Or the submission is missing the required element. So as we went through, some of the submissions in Section 5 have elements that must be part of them, and we'll be checking to make sure that those are there. Definition of materially deficient. The forms or submission components are included, but the information included is so deficient that HUD determines at its sole discretion that submission is effectively incomplete. For example, the submission, that's supposed to address eligible purposes or activities does not actually address eligible purposes or activities. Applicants are reminded to please thoroughly review the ICDBG-CARES Implementation Notice to ensure that they have submitted all the required components necessary for a complete application. Okay. If a grant application is selected for award, ONAP staff will send the recipient an award letter and a grant agreement package to sign and return that will include the grant agreement and addendum. All of this will be done electronically. The grant agreement can be signed, scanned, and sent back to ONAP electronically. Documents with signatures, wet signatures, should be maintained in the recipient's records. Funds will be available in the line of credit control system, LOC, as soon as the fully executed grant agreements are returned by the applicant and processed by HUD. The following reporting requirements apply to ICDBG-CARES grants. HUD may issue further guidance on reporting requirements in the near future. Okay, so SF 425, the quarterly federal financial reports are required for the ICDBG-CARES grants. Annual status and evaluation report, ACER, will be required for the ICDBG-CARES grants. And additional CARES Act reporting will be required. So under Section 15011 of the CARES Act requires that recipients of $150,000 or more of CARES Act funding submit not later than 10 days after the end of each calendar quarter a detailed report outlining activities and expenditures. So we will be issuing further guidance on this in the future. Here's a nice list of general resources available. I think what I'll do at this point is maybe show you a little bit of what this looks like on the ONAP COTOP website. I find that that's often helpful. So I'm going to switch so you all can see my screen. First, let me make sure I don't have anything crazy up. Kidding, I never have anything crazy up. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is the ONAP Office of Native American Programs COTOP website. Here you'll see, as soon as you get on and scroll down a bit, there's this big yellow box, and it includes links to all or almost all of our resources on the ICDBG-CARES and ICDBG-CARES programs. Here you'll see you can get to the link that takes you to the notice. Training slides are posted, all that helpful stuff. So that's one of the resources that's listed here on this slide in the presentation. Also links to other notices having to do with this funding opportunity, general information about COVID-19, fact sheets, and other helpful resources. Okay, so at this time, we're going to open things up to questions. Before we get into that, and I'm sure I'll remind you all of this at the end too, if you have questions about this notice, please feel free to reach out to your area office. As you're putting your application together and you're wondering about details of the notice, you should feel free to reach out to them. But please do keep in mind, you know, if we're really getting into the nuances of your specific project, you should probably just submit it. At some point, you know, it's good to ask questions, it's good to understand the notice, but at some point, you know, you need to keep in mind that we're going to look at that application and evaluate it, and that's going to be what determines things moving forward. All right, let's get into questions. Could we first check to see if anybody is on the line waiting, and then we'll look at the chat?
There are currently no questions over the phones at the moment.
Okay, great.
All right, so I'm going to go through the questions we received on the chat. Hillary, can you remind the participants if this training was recorded for access later and then the application deadline date?
For sure. So this training is being recorded. There is a recorded version of this training that was already held, currently available, just to note. Also, the date for submitting the applications, the date that you can start submitting the applications is June 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern.
Okay, thank you. So the first question, we have several questions about eligible activities. So it looks like the applicant is interested in possibly leasing refrigerator trucks to store meat. Would the lease, associated setup costs, and electricity service charges all be allowable?
Yes, I think so. I think that as long as you tie it to preventing, preparing, and responding to COVID-19.
Great. Next question. Would a need to create space for social distancing be a sufficient need to justify an imminent threat proposal for building renovations?
Yes, I think so. I think that's getting right at the purposes that we've discussed, of preventing, preparing, and responding to COVID-19. And rehab of a building is an eligible activity.
Thank you. Next question. Can we acquire or purchase an existing house in our community with ICDBG-CARES funds to utilize for emergency housing to help prevent or prepare for COVID-19? And could they renovate as needed?
Yep. Similarly, I think that this is an activity that would be eligible, and this person made sure to state that it's to prevent, prepare, respond to COVID-19, so it sounds like that would be just fine.
Good. Is a food distribution program for the elderly, because elder centers are closed, considered emergency assistance or public service?
Oh, that's a good question.
This is John Amana here with ONAP. The answer to that question is both. Emergency payments provided under this program are a kind of public service activity, and so it would fall under both categories. But the actual activity is a public service activity, and the specific activity under public services is emergency payment.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about tribal resolutions. What must be contained in tribal resolutions? Will such items such as Fair Housing Act and building codes need to be included?
Okay, that's a good question. I think this came up yesterday. I don't think that it needs to include all that. I think it was some pretty basic elements, but I'm not remembering exactly what they were. Jed, would you mind? Unless it's not what I was thinking of.
Yeah, so the Fair Housing Act does not need to be addressed at all. There is a exemption from the Fair Housing Act under this program for grants for Indian tribes, so you don't have to worry about the Fair Housing Act. I don't believe we would require building codes. I think for purposes of this program, there's a few tribal resolutions that could come into play depending on what you're doing. But the one that we need at the application stage, the main one that we need is a tribal resolution governing citizen participation. And what this tribal resolution has to say is certify that you have met the citizen participation requirements. What that means is that you've posted your plans for what you're applying for under this program, how much money you're applying for, and you've given them a chance to comment on your plan. You can do this just with some sort of online posting that gives citizens in your jurisdiction a chance to chime in and provide their views. And so you would submit a tribal resolution stating that, certifying that you comply with these citizen participation requirements. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty streamlined. That's all it really needs to say. If you did receive comments and then you adjusted your plan based on those comments, you should also say that in your resolution to say, on such and such date, we posted this notice, we received comments, we considered them, we certify that we complied with citizen participation requirements. That's all you need to say in the tribal resolution that should come. This tribal resolution is required in your application, but we understand that you may not be able to secure it in time. So it's not going to, if you don't have it in your application because you couldn't secure it in time, that's fine. It's not going to make you lose your spot, but we will require it while we're processing your application as sort of a trailing document that we need before we make the grant available to you. And if you can't secure this tribal resolution because of safety concerns or the shutdown of the tribal government, you certainly can ask for a waiver and we'll consider it. But don't make it overly convoluted. Don't need to address the Fair Housing Act or building code. Now, there are some nuances there when it comes to construction standards, rehabilitation standards, where tribal resolutions may be required as well, depending on if you're doing new construction or rehabilitation. But we're looking into that. We'll provide you more guidance. It does not have to be included in your initial application to get a spot. So don't worry too much about that. We'll follow up.
Okay, and Jed, what is the question meant? I wasn't sure if it meant that or if it meant the resolution by the tribe, from a tribal organization seeking to apply on behalf of a tribe.
If it's that resolution, so if you're a tribal organization, you're applying on behalf of that Indian tribe, we do need a concurring resolution from the Indian tribe authorizing the tribal organization to apply on its behalf. Again, if you can't secure that in time with your initial application, as long as your application includes a waiver request in the application with a strong justification for why you can't secure that tribal resolution, we will take your application and then make you get that tribal resolution on the back end. So you can still get a spot in line without that resolution initially. That resolution, same deal, does not have to address building codes, does not have to address the Fair Housing Act. It needs to be a resolution simply saying that you authorize the tribal organization to apply on your behalf.
Thanks. And since we're talking about tribal resolutions, there are more questions about that. So is there a specific form or template applicants should follow to request a resolution?
No, there aren't specific templates. We will try to see if there's a good example that we could post, though.
Okay. And if the tribe is the one that's applying, does the tribe itself need a resolution?
No, the resolution regarding the applicant would be from a tribal, if a tribal organization is applying and needs a resolution from the tribe authorizing it to do so.
Okay. Can you remind everyone again, Hillary, of what is the funding opportunity notice number and the title for the SF-424?
So we were asking folks to use the PIH notice number as the funding opportunity notice number. So the PIH notice number is 2020-11. And I'm going to have to pull it up to tell you exactly what the title of it is. But there is a link to it on the ONAP Code Talks website.
Okay.
It is the ICDBG-CARES Implementation Notice.
Thank you. And then, are TDHEs eligible to apply as a tribal organization?
So the same eligibility rules apply here as they would under the ICDBG program. If you're not sure whether you're eligible under ICDBG, please contact your area office for more guidance.
Thanks. Then we have a comment here. Tribes must know the outcome of the FY 1920 ICDBG awards to make the best decision going for the ICDBG CARES opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We do plan to publish those awards soon.
Before taking more questions in the chat, perhaps we should check with the event producer to see if there are questions on the phone.
We do have a couple questions in the queue.
Okay, we can start taking some of those before we proceed with the questions in the chat.
Okay, your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello. This is another tribal resolution question. If you're doing a public facilities project, does the tribal resolution need to include the commitment to provide operations and maintenance for the public facilities?
This came up yesterday in the webinar, and we tabled it to look into it. This is a requirement that is a requirement that's typically included in our NOFA for single-purpose projects. So can we come back to this one in a few minutes? Let me look up a couple of things. I did send this one to our Office of General Counsel yesterday to get a call on it, and I did not get a response in time, hoping to be able to address it here. But let's table it for a few minutes and let me look at a couple of things, and I'll hopefully be able to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next question in the queue. Your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
We can't hear you just in case you're talking and are on mute.
I'm so sorry. We don't have any homes in the area that we can purchase for quarantining anyone who has been affected, but we do have land in the area that we can purchase and develop within probably about 6 months to a year, six to 9 months that we can get developed and place homes on this land. Is that an eligible opportunity or no?
Yes, the acquisition of land is an eligible activity, but you have to have sort of an end result here that ties back to preventing, preparing for, and responding to COVID-19. So I would say that's perfectly fine, but please make sure that there is a final project, whatever you're acquiring the land to build on it. There's a final facility or structure or homes on that land that you're acquiring that you can easily tie back to responding to coronavirus. We will not, you can't do land banking in this program. So you can't just buy land and sit on it, and that's not an eligible activity. You got to have a final
product,
tangible, eligible use of the land. So.
And if new construction is part of what you're proposing with that, please just keep in mind those couple of details of new construction that we discussed.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, with that, there are no further questions over the phone at this time.
All right, so we'll go back to questions in the chat. On the implementation schedule, in the example of calendar year on page 2, can you explain why May would be considered the first quarter?
I can't say that I have the implementation schedule in front of me. I think this is a good question for the area office. Please follow up with them on that.
Okay. Can housing be provided for those that aren't considered essential workers or medical staff?
You can provide housing assistance to families in your community. You don't have to be medical workers or essential staff, but I think it's critical to, once again, tie this back to coronavirus. So we don't want you to just say we're going to provide housing. We want you to say you're going to provide housing there and then tie it back to caring, preventing, or responding to coronavirus. So it's perfectly fine, but tie it back.
Great. Next question. Can funds be used to provide tribal members with a water well or pipe water to a home without access to water?
Yep, that should be fine. Just make sure to tie it back to those purposes.
Good. Next question. Most of the required forms are listed in the workspace section of grants.gov. Is there a central location for acquiring the current required forms in an editable format to be used for the application?
So we have links to the required forms in the notice. You should follow those links to get those forms. For the SF-424 specifically, there's a bit more direction because if you follow that link, you're brought to the grants.gov website. That's where that form lives. But we explain how to find the specific one that you need. We've heard from a few folks that they're having trouble with that form. It's probably because there's a lot of functions within that are possible. So like, a lot of forms, PDF forms, you might have to click enable all features or try a different browser. We've heard that for that SF-424 form specifically, for some folks, it only works in Internet Explorer. So just keep in mind that you might have to play with it a bit and make sure that you get in there, get the forms, and are able to download them sooner than later.
Thank you. So next question. Is there a preferred proposal format? For example, a single PDF with merged documents, a zip file, individual labeled documents as email attachments?
We don't have any formatting requirements, but I like this question. I like this question about preferences. Anything you can do to label documents with their submission labels is, of course, that's big time appreciated. It'll help us get through that review process more quickly. We should be able to take zip files. We should be able to take PDFs. One question that came up in the last couple of trainings was, what if the documents they're submitting are too big, too many for the email address to handle? We have a good amount of capacity, but if something like that happens, you will get a bounce back message and can follow up, with a quick email to complete your submissions, and we'll take that first email, as your date stamp. Or if you have to use 2 emails to get everything in, we'll take that first email as the date stamp. Please just make sure to follow up as close to as immediately afterwards with any needed second emails. One idea that came up during yesterday's training was doing a test ahead of time for some of these issues to make sure there's no bounce back with those types of issues. That is totally fine. You'll get the bounce back email saying, we're not taking applications until June 1st at 3 p.m., but at least you'll know that you're able to submit all of the documents in one email or not.
Okay, good. Next question. If we are providing direct assistance through rental or utility payments, is there a requirement for the client to prove a need as a result of the loss of income? Many have increased expenses due to the pandemic, and for low-income families, this is a very real problem, even for those who did not become unemployed.
So on this particular one, there isn't a specific requirement that we require you to document, but it's important to note that this isn't just rental assistance or utility assistance. This is emergency rental assistance and emergency utility assistance. And so it would be prudent for you to only provide this assistance to people who can fit under that emergency situation where they have experienced a drop in income, some sort of disruption in their ability to pay their rent or pay their utilities. This activity is not available for general rental assistance that you just simply provide to provide. It is limited to emergency payments that are provided to people who need the payments because of the ongoing emergency.
Thanks, Chad. So we have a question about how this funding relates to the regular imminent threat funding. Has the 2019-2020 IT allocation already been obligated, or will those funds be folded in with the ICDBG-CARES Act funding for allocation from this round?
Okay, well, we touched on this a bit earlier, that the regular IT funding is still available, and we're holding that up, at least currently, for non-COVID related imminent threats.
Great. We have a question about construction projects. For any construction projects, do we have to use Davis-Bacon labor rates for contractor bids?
We have a provision in the program statute that authorizes us to essentially waive Davis-Bacon for the program, and we've done that through a regulation that we've issued with respect to this program. So not to throw a bunch of regs at you, but if you look at a regulation that's codified in 24 CFR 1003.603, so it's a 24 CFR 1003.603 is the ICDBG regulation governing labor standards for this program. And if you read that provision, you'll see that we waived Davis-Bacon wage rates with respect to this program. So that's my answer.
Great. Next question. If a tribe is submitting an application, do they need to verify that they are eligible as per Title I of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act? Or is this requirement only for an entity applying on behalf of the tribe?
If you are an Indian tribe and you're listed on the annual list of federally recognized Indian tribes that the Bureau of Indian Affairs publishes, and I think it's referenced in this Implementation Notice, then you should be fine. You don't have to prove that you're eligible under Title I. This really is a requirement that applies to tribal organizations.
Okay, thanks. Maybe we should pause here to see if there are any questions on the phone.
Looks like we have one in the queue.
Okay.
Yes. I know you said that if this is another resolution question. If we can't get the resolution, the main resolution, it could be done after the application. However, we have today's a deadline for ours. So in our tribal resolution, can we put a generic, we are applying for up to $900,000 in ICDBG-CARES funding, or does the exact amount in our budget, because we don't have our budget completed yet, do you need the exact amount in the resolution?
I think that would be perfectly fine.
Okay, so the generic number would be fine?
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. Part of this process is that you are seeking citizen feedback to adjust your plans potentially. So you don't have to know exactly what you're going to do before you ask them, because it could change. So it's perfectly fine to give them a general idea. You do need to list some amount in terms of the amount of assistance you're planning on applying, but that's fine if you say up to $900,000 for the following activities or projects. Please give us your feedback. Does this meet your needs? Do you have comments on ways we can do this, or ways to other things we can do with this grant opportunity?
Okay, so for the citizenship participation, that definitely works. What about the primary resolution on behalf of the tribe for applying for it? Do we need to wait until?
Yeah, that's fine too. You don't have to. That does not have to list out a specific amount. It just needs to authorize the tribal organization to apply on behalf of the tribe.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions on the phone?
We don't have any further questions.
Okay. So I'll go back to the chat questions. A citizen participation question here. Where does an applicant post information on citizen participation? See slide 34.
Oh, good question. We don't specify a specific requirement, I guess, around that. You could post it on Facebook, something publicly available where people can get to it and review the information. We might have given a few ideas in the notice. But yeah, good question. Thank you.
Okay. Can you clarify all the environmental conditions that must be met before the application is submitted?
Okay. So I think this is getting to the requirement in the program guidance on the regular ICDBG IT program that the environmental review be completed and sent in with the application. That does not apply to these funds. You'll notice that isn't listed as submission requirements for this program. So you're not required to submit information on that. I'm not sure if that quite answers the question. I think it does.
Okay. There was a question about slide 23. Is new construction of housing for victims of domestic violence who are under stay-at-home orders and otherwise cannot find safe housing, do you think this is eligible?
Yes, it's an eligible use of funds and in the regular program. One of the categories of, in the regular program, it's a rule that won't necessarily apply here, but one of the populations that's assumed to be eligible under this program are victims of domestic violence who fit into the limited clientele category. So perfectly fine, eligible use of funds, new housing construction, and you're serving a population that calls out even eligible under the regular program, which is more restrictive than this.
Great. Can the costs for operations and maintenance of a new structure also be proposed in an ICDBG-CARES as an eligible activity?
So one of the things we did under the waivers was issue, so typically under the program, operation and maintenance expenses for public facilities is not an eligible use of funds. We issued a waiver with respect to operation and maintenance of these facilities. But I would encourage you to look at PIH Notice 2020-05. That's the waiver notice that Hillary mentioned earlier. And there are some parameters in terms of what you can use this funding for when you're doing operation and maintenance of these facilities. For instance, you can't pay for staffing costs. We did not waive that. But you can pay for general operation and maintenance of public facilities. Again, this is for public facilities that are designed to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. So you're not applying for this money to just operate and maintain any public facility. This has to be a public facility like a emergency shelter set up to address homelessness, to mitigate the effects of the virus, or a medical facility where you're ensuring that you're paying for expenses that aren't covered by the Indian Health Service or some other agency, that kind of thing.
Okay. Next question. Are over-income households eligible for new housing or just housing payments?
So this.
Go ahead, Hillary.
Okay. So over-income households are eligible for assistance under ICDBG-CARES. There's no, we went over that a bit earlier in the presentation. I'll try to find that slide now just for you all to look at. There are a few restrictions around emergency payments that you should note, but otherwise, over-income can be served.
Are you ready for the next question, Hillary? Are you going to find the slide?
Yes.
Okay, next question. Is the purchase of vehicles allowable for construction crew use?
So, generally, this, I don't know if this question is referring to construction vehicles or vehicles for construction crews, regular vehicles or construction equipment. There is a general prohibition in the regular program against paying for construction equipment. Exception in the regular program is paying for leasing expenses or depreciation of these kinds of construction equipment. There is also a prohibition against purchasing motor vehicles under the regular program. We issued a waiver governing equipment. Again, take a look at PIH Notice 2020-05. One of the ICDBG waivers deals with equipment, and we waived the prohibition against equipment provided the equipment that you are purchasing with these funds is necessary to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. So if you can make the connection, and it needs to be a strong connection, between purchasing vehicles for construction crews and preventing, preparing for, and responding to coronavirus, it's probably fine under that waiver. But I want to emphasize that you have a strong connection to doing those kinds of preventative measures or responsive measures to coronavirus, and not just buying cars for construction crews.
Thank you. Hillary, can you clarify again, where can we access the recording for this training?
On the ONAP Code Talk website. There is already a recording posted from the training on the same material that was held on Friday. The training that was held yesterday will be posted there, and this training will be posted there.
Thank you. And then will the purchase of food and cleaning, disinfecting supplies to distribute around the tribal community fall into the, it looks like this is a typo, it should be ICDBG-CARES grant?
Yeah, as long as it prevents, prepares, and responds to COVID-19.
So when it comes to these kinds of activities, I think it's important to note that there's different versions of these kinds of activities. If you're doing food delivery kinds of services, again, we generally limit those under the emergency payments category of eligible activity, public service, to up to 6 months of this activity. So you could do food distribution for a specific family up to 6 months. If they are low income, moderate income, and if they are over income, you can provide that service for up to 3 months on an emergency basis. Beyond that, there's a whole host of food-related activities that you can do in the form of food banks and figuring out public facilities to distribute food to the community. That's a public facility activity. Whether you're acquiring a facility to do that, converting or retrofitting an activity to do that, that's a public facility activity, and that is not time limited like the public service version of the actual food delivery part of this activity. So think of it like two activities. One is more of a public facility. The other is a food delivery public service. The first one doesn't have a time limit in terms of the amount of assistance you can provide to food bank, and the second one is more of a assistance to specific families, and that assistance is limited to 3 months or 6 months, depending on the income of the family.
Okay. And can you clarify again, do you have to include a statement on the tribe's commitment to provide operations and maintenance for public facilities in the tribal resolution?
Okay. I'm just going to answer this because it keeps getting asked. So I don't think this needs to be addressed. I've been looking at the program requirements. So we normally require this under the single purpose, the NOFA process, when we're rating and ranking public facilities. And the reason why we require this is because you cannot use ICDBG funds normally to pay for operation and maintenance costs of public facilities. So we require you to commit in your application normally that you have a plan to operate and maintain the facility, because we want to make sure that we're not funding public facilities that then can't be operated or maintained and fall into disrepair. And that's largely because you can't use these grant funds to do those kinds of costs. The difference here is, number one, we're not under the single purpose program, the regular ICDBG program. We're not under the NOFA. We're under the imminent threat program, which is not necessarily subject to the terms of the NOFA. Number two, we've issued a waiver allowing, as I said, for this funding to pay for the operation and maintenance costs of public facilities. So I would say your tribal resolution does not necessarily have to include, a plan and a commitment that you have other sources beyond the funding we're providing for you here to operate and maintain the public facility. With that said, you obviously should be planning to operate and maintain these facilities in the long term, and you don't want to have a situation where you're applying for a public facility now and you don't have a plan for how you're going to maintain and operate that facility into the future. This isn't a ton of funding that we're providing here at the end of the day, particularly when it comes to public facilities and public infrastructure improvements. So it's wise for you to think about how you're going to cover the operation and maintenance of these projects, but I don't think we're going to throw your application out because you don't include that in a tribal resolution.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Can we check if there are any questions on the phone?
There are currently no questions in the queue.
Okay, thank you. So regarding citizen participation, how much time should an applicant have in order to accept comments for citizen participation?
There's no bright line rule in the regular CDBG program. It's usually 30 days, and we've issued waivers in the past in the regular program to cut it down to 14 or 7 days when there's a disaster. In the ICDBG program, there is no specific timeline, and given that the applications are due, or we're going to start accepting applications on June 1st, I think it's fair to say a reasonable time between now and then that allows people some reasonable chance to respond. 5 days seems reasonable. The regular CDBG CARES Act program is authorizing citizen participation that is as short as 5 days. So you can do 5 days and you'll be perfectly fine for our purposes.
Okay. We have two related questions here about homeless shelters. If a tribe were to either build or rehab a building for a homeless shelter for the prevention of COVID, can this building remain as a permanent homeless shelter, or does it need to be converted to low-income rental units?
It can remain as a homeless shelter, or it can be converted. We're not going to mandate that. What it does have to do is be some sort of ICDBG eligible purpose for a minimum period of time. So under the ICDBG regulations, there is a regulation governing the disposition of real property that's acquired with these grant funds. What the rules say is that you have to use these facilities as real property for its originally intended purpose for the period of the grant plus 5 years after the closeout of the grant. Okay? After that, it's free and clear of federal CDBG requirements. If the regulations also govern situations where you want to change the use or dispose of the property. If you dispose of the property, the money you considered, the proceeds are considered program income, and you have to use the money for ICDBG CARES purposes, or another eligible ICDBG CARES purpose. And at the time of closeout, we'll also execute a closeout agreement with you that will say what you do with program income that you're holding at the time of closeout or program income that you might earn after closeout. So we can address what happens with any proceeds after that, but I think the general rule is plan on using this facility for the life of the grant plus 5 years after grant closeout. If you're going to sell the facility or change the use of the facility, there are definitely ICDBG restrictions on what you can use for, what you can change the use for. Talk to your ONAP staff and we'll work with you. But if you're doing low-income housing, that's probably a perfectly fine change of use, but you need to talk to your area ONAP before you do that.
Okay. And similarly, Jack, could you address acquisition? So what happens to the homes purchased for quarantining after the pandemic ends?
So this is the same situation. So if you're acquiring housing to house people to ensure that you're addressing, let's say, severe overcrowding, and you need housing to put people in to ensure that the virus doesn't spread. Same rule. You're using grant funds to acquire real property. You have to make sure the real property meets the original purpose that you got the grant for the life of the grant plus 5 years after grant closeout. But if you want to change the use of the property or sell the property, there are restrictions on what you can use it for or what you can use the proceeds for. Talk to your area ONAP staff and we'll work with you.
Okay, thank you. Will ONAP be providing FAQs for the ICDBG CARES implementation training?
That's a good question. So unfortunately, the turnaround time to get FAQs approved is not enough time before that date of submission, the June 1st date. Although we are working on FAQs regarding this notice, they will not be published more than likely before June 1st. That's why we're holding these 3 different national trainings so that people can ask questions and we can answer them consistently. Also, we will be working closely with our area office staff on any questions that are kind of beyond what we're talking about in these trainings. So as you have questions, please feel free to ask. Please feel free to contact your area office staff, and we will work to get those answered.
And I think it's important to note that we've published 4 rounds of FAQs, and we'll be publishing a 5th round shortly. And some of the FAQs online address ICDBG-related stuff. So we have published some FAQs in this area.
All right. Thank you, Chad.
And also, there's a question about the regular ICDBG competitive process. Could you provide an approximate time frame from when applicants would be notified?
Was the question about this opportunity, or was it about regular ICDBG? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch it.
It's the regular ICDBG. Can you provide an approximate time frame when applicants would be notified if they've been funded under the regular cycle?
Okay. So I think we touched on this earlier, but we plan to notify applicants for the FY 19-20 regular ICDBG soon.
Next question, can we provide tribal members with items such as washer and dryer in preparation for the closure of a local laundromat?
This is sorry. Yep. This is an interesting one. So normally under this program, you can pay for stoves, you can pay for fridges, you cannot pay for washers, dryers. But again, we issued a waiver governing the purchasing of equipment if it is designed, if it's necessary to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. My sense is that probably it fits within the waiver that we issued, and it's probably fine. Generally, you cannot use these funds for washers and dryers, but this is a unique crisis that has sort of necessitated the need for new uses of these funds, and I think this is probably one of
them.
them.
And then similarly, there was another question about equipment. How about the purchase of a generator to ensure that a building would be functional during an emergency?
Yeah, again, that's, equipment associated with I'm not sure what the building here in this scenario would be, but the purchase of the equipment potentially could be perfectly fine as long as you can make that tie back to the emergency.
Okay. We have a question about the review process. So if in HUD's review of an application, it is determined that one of the activities is not eligible, will you just fund the eligible activities? Or will the application be taken out of the queue and the applicant will be asked to revise the whole application?
Good question. I think it's the first option. So we're going to look at, as part of the substantive review, we will be looking at all the activities proposed and determining whether they're eligible, and we reserve the right in the notice to only fund certain activities or not fund certain activities.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Next question, we have a question about would the cost of professional sanitation of tribal public buildings be an eligible activity?
So I think this is kind of a bit tricky, but Chad, jump in if you disagree. So sanitation type activities would be generally an eligible activity under this notice, but I believe what we're getting into is perhaps use of funds for government buildings, general use of government, which continues to be ineligible under this program.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a question of government. It's specifically dealing with the seat of the government, so where the tribal council is located, where the chief executive officer of the tribe is located, the tribal headquarters. You cannot use these funds to provide any sort of assistance or rehabilitation or cleaning service or anything related to the tribal headquarters. But there are exceptions to that. Just because it's a government building doesn't necessarily mean it's a building for the general conduct of government. So you can have offshoot tribal government buildings here and there that aren't the center, the main primary tribal government building that could potentially be assisted with these funds, including for cleaning and sanitation. But if you're asking about the main tribal headquarters, there is a statutory and regulatory prohibition against that. We did not waive that.
Okay, great. So next question is regarding utility and rental assistance, and it's a three-part question. The first question is, can payments be made to the tribal member so they can pay their bill? Knowing that we are still under a stay-at-home order and summer is coming up, this is a time when utilities potentially increase. So can we send out a check for assistance to pay utilities? And then I'll pause right there.
Yeah, I would advise against doing this directly. So one of the concerns that we have when you provide these kinds of emergency payments directly in the form of checks or debit cards is you can't document sometimes on the back end what the assistance was used for. So you can say, we're going to send checks to everybody. The cash then is to help them pay their bills. But who's to say they're definitely going to take that money and pay their bills? And so if you're going to do these kinds of programs, we've been advising grantees to try to provide particularly when it comes to utility assistance, provide the assistance to the third-party provider, to the utility company. That way you can easily document that the end use of these funds was an eligible use, and when we come out to monitor you, or the HUD OIG goes out to monitor you, you could clearly demonstrate this is where the funding went. So I would advise against providing this assistance directly in that kind of form. But you can provide this assistance, just be smart about it and try to do it through the third party so you can document it and not get yourself in trouble on the back end.
And then the third part of the question actually deals with reimbursement. So in this scenario, the tribe has provided general welfare assistance of $250 to be used for food, housing, or PPE products. So would they be able to use the ICDBG grant to reimburse their general funds?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably not. If it's general welfare assistance, it's still prohibited under the program. You can provide rental assistance, utility assistance, limited mortgage assistance, clothing, medical assistance, and other emergency assistance. You cannot provide general welfare assistance. So one of the conditions of using these funds for reimbursement is that the costs that were incurred by the tribe, including before, enactment of the CARES Act, is that the costs have to be eligible under the program. And because paying for general welfare assistance is not an eligible use of ICDBG-CARES funds, you cannot use these funds to reimburse the tribe for those general welfare that assistance that was provided in the past. With that said, if the tribe had used its tribal funds to pay, for example, let's use the previous utility example. If the tribe had used its general funds, tribal funds, to pay the utility providers on behalf of families, you probably can use the reimbursement authority under this program to reimburse those tribal funds, those general tribal funds for those costs, because if the costs were eligible under this program, they can also be reimbursed.
Okay. And then do you know if hazard pay is an allowable expense?
Yeah, we provided some guidance on this. Hazard pay is an eligible expense under this program. Again, it's an administrative expense, so you do have a cap, a 20% cap on how much you can spend on these costs. In terms of what you can pay for, you can pay for whatever is reasonable and necessary under the circumstances. So if in a certain sector, let's say you're paying hazard pay to housing maintenance staff or hazard pay to construction crews, if in the local area the general acceptable or accepted hazard pay is 8% more than normal pay under the current circumstances, and that's considered reasonable, you can use these funds to pay for those costs.
Okay, thank you. We have a question about the time period for the grant. So if a project will reasonably exceed 12 months, could you give us examples of the documentation that you would require for us to support or justify that time period?
So I think that if you look at the notice, and Hillary went over this in one of the slides, there are a bunch of things we list out in terms of factors we will consider when assessing the reasonableness of your timeline. And it's things like barriers to your construction season or barriers to receiving supplies and materials and labor, the effect of COVID-19 on your community, how badly you're hit, if at all, yet. We're going to consider all those things. Most importantly, probably, is nature of the activities and projects that you're doing. If you're proposing a food distribution activity, that can be done relatively quickly. If you're proposing infrastructure, water infrastructure, that's probably going to take you longer. So we're going to look at the nature of your activity and try to assess the reasonableness of the time period you're proposing. But I can't stress this enough, and this came up yesterday on the webinar. Don't plan on doing projects that are going to take 5 years. We need to be able to make sure that these projects are executed expeditiously regardless of how long the money is available for under the CARES Act. And so I think you should be probably looking at, for short-term activities, less than 12 months, for some activities, less than 24 months, and then for longer activities, probably around no longer than a 3-year period. That's not a hard, fast rule. We'll consider all proposals, but that should be around the time range that you are looking at.
Okay, that's really helpful. So we have about 10 minutes left in this training session. Can we check with the event producer? Have there been any questions or people waiting on the phone for questions?
Looks like there's still no questions on the line.
Okay. And we'll try to get through the remaining questions here in the chat. So this is a good question here. Is the hiring of personnel allowable? We have rehab projects that will be starting once restrictions are lifted, and we are applying for more rehab units under this CARES funding, and we'll be needing more help for at least 2 more crew members to expedite the emergency needs, and additional clerical worker as well to help administer the new grant. So is hiring of personnel allowable?
Yeah, that would be an eligible administrative expense. You certainly can use these funds to hire more people, but I think it's critical to note that these funds aren't just used to hire people. The hiring of people needs to be associated with carrying out the grant. So you apply for a specific activity. The activities necessitate, if you're doing housing rehabilitation, for instance, like for example, the housing rehabilitation necessitates the hiring of additional staff beyond your core staff that you have. So you use a portion of the funding, up to 20% of your grant, to hire additional staff to carry out the grant. That's perfectly fine. But hiring people is not an eligible activity. It's an administrative expense to support the use of the grant.
Okay. Do you think tribes could use the CARES funding to acquire storage space to reduce overcrowding in tribal facilities owned by the tribe?
Storage space, probably. It seems like a public facility, warehouse kind of facility. I'm not sure how it alleviates space other than frees up additional space to house people or frees up additional space to reduce increase space in public facilities. But it's probably fine.
In the presentation, you said that over-income households can receive payments for 3 months. Can you clarify what sort of payments are you referring to?
So that's for the emergency payments. I'll find that slide here in the presentation. That was when you were talking about that over-income they generally can be served by this program, but emergency payments are limited to a 3-month time frame.
Good. Here's an interesting question about sanitation costs. Regarding the sanitation of the tribal offices, what if the U.S. local post office and the accounts receivable office that the publics make payments to are attached to the tribal building?
So that's a great question. So so when it comes to these rules on buildings for the general conduct of government, you can provide, this is tricky, but you can provide assistance to the portions of the building that aren't for the general conduct of government.
And that's something that is typical under ICDBG. So if you have questions about that, you can definitely reach out to your area offices for more clarification.
Okay. And then I don't think we've covered this yet, too. Would providing broadband services or capabilities for low-income members with children for distance learning be allowable?
Yeah, this question has come up quite a bit. Some of the examples we have is the implementation notice specifically get at broadband kinds of activities, particularly activities that will assist with distance learning for kids. Yes, generally this is a general activity that can be done. It just sort of depends on what exactly you're doing. You could increase and improve existing broadband capabilities. You can provide retrofits for homes to ensure access to the internet, or improving the local internet in the community to allow for better access to video, live videos, things like that. You can certainly do those kinds of activities. But they'll range from public facility, public improvement kinds of activities, utility kinds of activities, to hooking up homes to the internet.
Okay. Here's an interesting question about utilities. We are a tribal housing program, and we pay low-rent utilities to the tribe from a program income revenue account. We have waived the rent, so the account is not earning any income right now to pay the utilities to the tribe. Do you think we could pay those utility costs with ICDBG-CARES funding?
Let's table this one. This is a complicated one that's going to require a little brain power. We'll look at this, and Marco or whoever, if you can just make sure you know who the requester, the question is coming from. We'll get back to you on this particular question.
Okay. If I could ask the person who did send that question, if you could just type in the chat which entity you're with, which TDHE or housing program you're with, that'd be helpful, and then we can make sure we follow up accordingly on the response. Thank you. So just last couple of questions here. Do you have an example of an ineligible activity?
Sure. One of the slides we went through does list some ineligible activities. Why don't we go to that? And then as we're talking, we can take a look at that. I think one of the issues that could come up is somebody proposes something that is perhaps eligible but is not tied to preventing, preparing, or responding to COVID-19. That's not a very good example. Jed, do you have any good ideas?
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily say this is an ineligible use, but we've kind of advised against economic development activities. So you can use this funding technically for assistance to businesses, working capital, grants to businesses to make sure they hire people or keep them afloat. That's generally discouraged with this particular program for a couple of reasons. Number one, there's a great need for public services and public facilities right now. Number two, there are a lot of other resources assisting businesses right now, whether it's the Treasury funding or the SBA, PPP program, and other resources. So I would advise against applying for economic development activities because we are going to not fund those on a first-come, first-served basis, and I'm not sure we'll be able to fund any as a result. The other stuff is the stuff that's listed there. So political activities, general government expenses, just expenses of running the government are ineligible. And then, like we said, buildings for the general conduct of government. So the equivalent of city hall or tribal headquarters.
Mm-hmm. And just, looking carefully, reviewing carefully the waiver notice. That did expand its potential activities under this program, but you'll want to make sure that you're falling within, what's discussed in that notice. That could also get you into trouble as far as being potentially ineligible.
Okay, and then there's a quick reporting question here. Is there a special format that HUD is going to require for the Section 15011 reporting?
I could answer that. This is Gary Nimick. I'm the Director of Grants Evaluation. We do outline some items in the implementation notice of things you should include and pay attention to. And we're in the process right now as an agency looking at what the reporting requirements are that are unique to the CARES Act, and putting together some sort of a reporting tool or some sort of reporting method. But there is a requirement that on a quarterly basis, certain information be provided. And one thing to keep in mind is as you use these grants, keep track of the contracts and sub-grant agreements that you might enter into, as well as the number of jobs that might be created. We're not certain yet whether or not we're going to go that much into detail in the reporting, but there is a possibility that that will occur.
Okay, thank you. Well, we are at 4 o'clock. There were some last questions regarding the first come, first serve process. So I guess we do urge you to review your application beforehand. Make sure you do submit it on time. It is 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on June 1st is when we will start tracking those applications. So do submit those on time. And then Hillary, if you want to have any final comments.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks so much to Jad for all of your assistance with the questions on this conference. Thank you, Gary. Thanks to Marco Santos. He's actually the team leader for the GM team in headquarters. He was the one getting through all those questions with us. So just to wrap up, thank you all for participating in this training. I hope it was helpful. As we have said kind of throughout the presentation and when we kick things off, this is the third edition of this training to prepare for that June 1st submission date. This training and the others that have been held will be posted on the COTAC website. That's the Office of Native American Programs website, along with a bunch of other very helpful resources. During the presentation, we've alluded to other guidance being provided on some of these questions. When we say that, we mean the FAQs that have been previously published, so please make sure to check that out. Also, the information we went through and the details that we went over in the slides are in the notice, the ICDBG-CARES Implementation Notice, SPH Notice 2020-11. Please make sure you review that thoroughly and carefully before applying. And please make sure to also review the waiver notice that was issued in April. That's SPH Notice 2020-5. The training slides that we went through today are also available on the COTAC website with the other guidance and resources that were mentioned. So once again, thank you all so much for participating. Please take care. As you have questions about this notice, please reach out to your area office, and we look forward to your applications.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using